Welcome back, everybody. We are live for another episode of Growing with My Fellow Growers. This week, we're joined by a special guest, but I'll start off by introducing the panel members that you're probably familiar with before we get to the special guest. So starting with first, like I normally do, Spartan Grown.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Spartan Grown. You can find me on Instagram at Spartan Grown, all one word, no spaces, or you could always shoot me an email at spartangrown@gmail.com if you have questions. Not only do I grow organically at home, but I also do synthetics at work. So I have kind of a foot in both those worlds.
Always happy to have you back. And next up, we got Dr. MJ from cocoforcannabis.com.
Hey everyone, I am Dr. MJ Coco from cocoforcannabis.com, and I am happy to be back. Happy to see Full Duplex and everybody in the chat. Looking forward to another great show this week.
And next up, we have our resident IPM specialist and awesome dude, Matthew Gates.
Yeah, hey everyone, this is Matthew Gates. You can find most of my content about plant health on two places, Sync Angel on Instagram and my YouTube channel, Zenthanol. You can also find me on zenthanol.com.
Happy to have you back. And next up, we've got Brandon Russ.
What's going on, everybody? Glad to be here. Really stoked to have Dan on here, Full Duplex. It's going to be a good show today. Just always a pleasure, you know. What can you say? It's a Sunday. We got cheap home grow, talking weed, smoking weed. So I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you back. Next up, we got Aaron, the grower.
What's up? Yeah, this is so exciting. So cool to see Full Duplex on here. I'm Aaron the Grower, ATG Acres on Instagram, atgacres.com. Just stoked to be here.
Happy to have you back, and soon to be partners in Oklahoma with Pure Breeding. Kyle, welcome.
Hey everybody, glad to see Dan back. It's real nice, and I'm glad everyone's here and safe. And my name's Kyle Breeder. I have a a seed company. If anybody's looking for feminized seeds, I do have a website, which is the letter P followed by breeding.com. And all my social media platforms is now Pure Breeding. And yeah, if anybody ever has any questions, feel free to reach out. I enjoy communicating with everyone, and I'm glad to be here.
Happy to have you back. And last from our regular panel members, the American one. Welcome.
Woohoo, Jack. Everyone on the panel, glad to be here. Everyone in chat, good to see y'all. I'm the American one on the YouTubes, and the American one _with_Keens on the IGs. Most of you know where to find me. If you have any problems, just look for the little guy with the American top hat when you search the American one, and you'll find me.
Good stuff. Always happy to have you back. And last but certainly not least, our special guest this week. Many of you know him from the Autoflower Network, formerly known by a different name, but I'll let him introduce himself.
Thanks for having me on this afternoon, guys. I go by Full Duplex. Some of you know me as Dan. I've kind of come out with the real name recently. As Jack was talking there, I formerly Mandalorian Genetics, but now Gnome Automatics. You can find me Full Duplex _AFN on Instagram or gnomeautomatics.com. You'll get a rundown of everything that we're doing there and some updates. Join the mailing list and stuff like that. It's an honor to be back with you guys. Sorry it's been so long, but it's always like home when I come back, so I appreciate it.
I love it when we have somebody from for those who don't know, a little cheap home grow group chat where we send messages like where the Zoom link goes out to. And most of the panel members are there, but we have a few extras like Hota Herb is in there and Green Goddess Supply, who occasionally join us on the show and are always welcome. And Dan is one of those people. So I know recently you sent Brandon as well as Kyle some genetics, and I'm not sure which strain. So maybe that'd be a good place to start off talking about, because that's a good connection, I think, that you already have with this group. And it'd be interesting for a lot of the listeners to find out some of the collaboration that's going on.
Yeah, man, well, I appreciate it. So Brandon picked up some of my autos earlier this spring, early summer, to go out there at the farm. And then Kyle and I are actually working together on a collaboration and hybridization. So it's really exciting to work with both of you gentlemen. Kyle sent me some autoflowers that honestly I've never smelled terps on like before. I was pretty impressed with the terp profile that's coming off of those, and it's amazing just to be able to expand and reach out and kind of get the autoflower out of the shadow, especially seeing it on commercial facilities and with the home growers too. It's become a huge wave with home growers. Like as more states start to go legal, we're seeing more of the autos just showing up in home tents.
Oh yeah. I have to say, you know, bad timing on our part when we did all of our planning, and we completely like jacked up our whole like outdoor, because it was our first time in Oklahoma, and we were really just short on staff and stuff. But I'll tell you what, dude, everything that we harvested out of the Anvil and the blackstrap had so much color. One was straight purple. Every single one straight purple, had that nice that cannabis smell that is the nice pine lemon terps, right? And then we had the other one, which instead of being just straight purple, the colors were more of a rainbow mix, where you got a lot of green, magenta, turquoise, and it was kind of mixed all in through there. Even some like off red coloration, and they're really nice. We're gonna send some off for testing to see percentage on return for frozen material, and then I think we're probably gonna do maybe a pre-roll line with the rest of what we have.
Nice. And I know for, earlier this summer, I was able to run some for some hash, and it was really interesting to see the return actually be purple. You get a lot of colored water often, but then you usually get, the golden colored product, and a lot of especially Anvil, I know either dried or fresh frozen, they both wash out purple. Like everything, I haven't got it to the pressed phase yet. I didn't have enough to both enter into the cup as well as like press it. But I will tell you that any kind of fresh frozen that comes from Anvil will be a colored, at least hash. The rosin, not sure yet. It'd be interesting to see somebody run it that far. I haven't done enough to actually, use some for the press process.
I would guess if the hash is purple, the press will be purple. The anthocyanin is in there. I've even seen people who make THCA solventless, where they just keep on pressing the same thing in the same bag, basically over and over at low temps to get the terpenes out, and you're left with basically THCA. And even the THCA will still have anthocyanin in it, because I guess it doesn't degrade at as low of a temperature as the terpenes do. So I'd be interested to see it made to the rosin. Every single person I've seen grow the Anvil has it purple. I know Spartan Grown got to try some out of Sequence Greenhouse. They did a good amount of it, like down the rows between the photoperiod plants. And I think they had a pretty successful crop because of that. They had a pretty huge harvest. I mean, not solely because of that. They did a lot of work on the photoperiod side of things as well, but it was great to see them have success as well as many others. And I'm curious if Spartan can remember that. I remember there's a YouTube video of, I think, you and Abolished Farms reviewing one of the strains from now Gnome Automatics.
Yeah, the one thing that stood out the most on Anvil specifically is the bud. Like Brandon said, they're super purple, but they also, like the look of them, it looked like it was made of velvet or something. Like it was almost like it was made of a felt or fabric.
It's not the regular purple, man. There was some
right.
Okay, there was some of them that had a specific purple to them, and it was like it's weird. They had a different shade. There was like one phenotype that was a certain shade of purple, and then I remember going through all of the things that we were harvesting and separating out like the phenos that had this, like, I don't know how to describe it. It was just like more of a like, it would just look more appealing to me. It was just I just gravitated towards it more. It wasn't like super, it wasn't really, really dark, but it was more of like a true vibrant purple.
There is another compound that's blue that has been found in cannabis called azulene, I believe, in really, really low concentrations. Talked to a botanochemist, Jonathan, about this once in like a private DM. And he's like, antho is not the only thing that causes that blue color. Now, antho can be like purple, red, blue. But yeah, dude, azulene. I don't know if anybody else knows anything about it or if they've seen it in tests before, but
apparently it's an isomer of naphthalene.
Is what?
Azulene. Assuming I have the word spelling right, I have here Azulene.
Do you think what is responsible for some of the blue concentrate that was floating around for a little bit?
I wonder what
Well, that's potentially what can be left behind in the THCA, like you were talking about.
Yeah, just a cursory Wikipedia article, not really.
What is that word?
Here.
Naphthamine? Is that what you said? What is that?
Naphthalene.
Naphthalene. What is that?
That's people who know about mothballs, for example. It's a toxic compound. It's an organic compound here. People look up on Wikipedia. I'm familiar with it as an ingredient for like some pesticides and also like in mothballs. Not to rain on anyone's parade, like, sodium and chloride put together is table salt, but, by themselves, it's a metal and,
other things.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, here, just this cursory article says that it's a chromophore. It makes things blue, certainly. It was discovered in yarrow and wormwood, it says here. And I guess we've known about it for a long time, since the late 1800s.
Well,
And
I guess that's a lot on the blue topic, but I know Dan is actually more known for the purples. And I'm curious if there was a time in your breeding where you're like, hey, I'm going to start selecting for purple, or were the purple plants just the best ones that you were working with? What drove the Anvil and maybe some of your other, I think even Coal Miner's Daughter is pretty dark from what I've seen, almost black. Is there
Sorry, no, I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. Is there any reason? Did you pick for that, or was it something that just came about in your breeding process?
No, the purple came from frustration of buying stuff. Like years ago, I wanted to have purple flowers. I wanted to see purple. I'd seen plenty of green. That was the actual motivation for the depth of Anvil, was to actually have something consistent across the board that not only did purple, but was also in expression, structurally sound. But yeah, the purple was completely selected for because they're at F8 now in regular form. By generation 4, I was getting both purple males and purple females, where, as the male clusters started forming on the crown of the bud sites, like the sacs were as dark as flowers were coming out. And there were 3 generations, F5, F6, and F7 were all used purple male, purple female during the pheno hunt. And I'd be really shocked at this point to see a green one. I don't think I've ever seen a green one. But yeah, it was primarily selected for that purple bud and for the purple hash. I really wanted to see purple hash. Like, why not take it a step further? I knew the anthocyanins were high enough. A lot of times they get up into the stalk of the trichome. They don't make it into the glandular heads. And when I started seeing that, it's like, all right, it's time to start playing with something else. The Coal Miner's Daughter is more, I want to go darker with her. I do like the dark leaf fade too. Anvil can do it. She does have pretty colors during fade, but not so much as the Coal Miner's Daughter. Black flower and then black leaf.
Now breaking down some of the... Sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
I was going to ask you that. Have you ever seen any outliers, meaning like a random green one and a whole seed lot or something? But I guess you kind of answered it.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I mean, there's been a couple commercial farms other than Brandon's where I've worked with a lot here in Washington. And everybody who's grown, there's never been a green outlier, which is completely incredible. And it's not just 200 or 300 seeds. It's been thousands of seeds over the last 3 years I've been working with commercial facilities.
I've seen hundreds of home growers growing them, and maybe not hundreds. I don't know. It seems like hundreds at this point with the hashtag. I follow it and just follow people that grow it, and you reposting a lot of them, and it's all purple from what I've seen. So that's pretty, F8 is pretty deep into the genetics. So I think you've nailed down the purple for sure. The Coal Miner's Daughter, the other thing that I noticed was it does seem Anvil is purple and it's more black. And I think a lot of people don't have that distinction. A lot of people just think like dark purple, everything's purple. But I think that there is that really like where I saw it first was the Forum Cut Girl Scout cookie. When it's well done, in my opinion, it's black leaf. If it's the true cut. I have a few buddies here in San Diego that just kill it with that. And although it's like potentially herming, prone, it has that really killer fade and it's frosty and good high, not a huge yielder. It doesn't love light, but as far as the Coal Miner's Daughter, and actually, I guess starting with the Anvil, what is some of the genetic lineage on that?
I do. My breeding programs are a little bit different. I do phenotypical isolations. I'll take photo to auto, usually get to about F3 from those, and then I will look for matching parents out of that progeny. And then I will split the lines going down there and then chase them down the rabbit hole and, line breeding style. Stabilization for sex, obviously, first and foremost, and then traits, terpenes, and expression after that. So with that said, the original makeup genetics for Anvil and Coal Miner's Daughter actually came from Mossy's Dragon, which is a Spanish cultivar I had sourced 10 years ago, was already in full autoflower form. And there's some deep chunk and Bubba Kush on the photoperiod side. Kind of stayed with the Afghani influence. I seem to see a lot of colors coming from those lines. The bud structures I like the stone. That's my preference. Sativas every now and again, but the Bubba Kush and the deep chunk, man, the deep chunk honestly is where your blacks are coming from. I mean, it's some beautiful Afghani weed, and that's Tom Hill's original deep chunk too.
I've only heard of it. I haven't got to play around with it, but I've seen people grow it, and it does tend to be pretty dark. I thought because of the name, it would be a pretty heavy yielder, but I've also been told that deep chunk wasn't a big yielder. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
It's not a real big yielder. It's not super high in THC either. The best tests we had that I saw out here on the farms were between 18 and 20%. I mean, some people might consider that high. A lot of, today's standards don't see that as high. I don't believe it's all about THC these days, but yield wise, not a very big yielder, but colorful, very earthy, spicy, like white pepper style terpenes and taste to those. But yeah, and it does real well, surprisingly, with the climate up here as well. We get a lot of rain starting about 3 weeks ago, and it held up through, all the fungal issues that we have with PM and botrytis.
That's a great trait to have for sure. And I know a lot more people are getting into autoflowers. I think that you and maybe some of the autoflower network were kind of on the early end of that, because when I first started hearing about autos, there wasn't really a lot of good publicity. The low riders and some of the stuff, a lot of people were not very fond of them. You'd see like several plants that were shorter and didn't do as well. But I think you, as well as a handful of other auto breeders, have taken it a long way since I think it was about a decade ago when the low rider was like the one. But now there's a lot more options that are a lot better performing.
There are. I mean, we started the Autoflower Network, so it's 2021. So yeah, it was 10 years ago, 2011. Previous to that, hung out on other forums and stuff, getting my feet wet with them. But yeah, I've been working on them since then. I saw some potential back then. I could tell that the plant needed help itself. I mean, it had a lot of potential, and there's still monumental amount of work to be done. There's a lot of what I'm seeing like coexisting traits to the day neutral trait, and that's a whole different rabbit hole. But like working some of that out of the structures, like where it needs to go. And what I've seen a lot of the other breeders, like Daz, for example, from Night Owl, he's put a lot of dedication into it, and he's been at it longer. I would say, yeah, definitely longer than I have been. I know he worked with Mephisto for a while. But yeah, there's a good group of us out there, and it's a nice thing. It's a nice community. Ever since the Autoflower Network, we kind of all watch each other's back. I see a nice family on that side of the autoflowers than other sides. You know what I mean? I see a lot of drama other places, but not with the auto community. They kind of stick together.
I've seen that as well, and it's nice to see. Daz left Mephisto. I think those guys are over in Spain, if I'm not mistaken. But they did a lot of great work. The Forgotten Cookies, going on to like Chef Anna, he was one of the first people I ever saw test over like 20 or even 25% THC with autos, which I think put in a lot of people's mind like, oh, these can actually have potency. Although we were just talking about THC percentage isn't everything. It was nice to see that they were actually able to get up as high as some of the photoperiods that a lot of people like. But that said, I think a lot of the true OGs and older Afghanis are in that like 17 to 20% range and can have a really strong high, but don't necessarily represent it in just the cannabinoid numbers. It might be terpenes or other minor influences, but it's
right
that you got to work with some of those classics, the deep chunk, as well as the Bubba. I'm a huge Bubba fan.
Me too.
Some of their strongest really good flavor. It's very fond for me, and I know probably a lot of other people on this panel enjoy it. How much of that do you think is still representative? Like when you have some Anvil, do you notice any of those Bubba traits coming through?
Not anymore. Not this far down the line. I mean, it's been isolated so much. It's kind of standard. Like I don't get the hints of the original Bubba that I had that I used for it at this point anymore. She was mainly used to kind of like increase potency a little bit, diversify the terpene profile, and bring in some of those minor cannabinoids that we were talking about, something unique and different.
Have you ever done any targeted breeding toward or selections towards the flowering time?
Yes. Couple things. Flowering time, and that's a double-edged sword with autoflowers, because if you want the flowering, if you want a larger plant to get away from what we were talking about with like the original lowriders, you have to increase that yield.
Longer.
It's and I mean, I've got stuff that'll go from like seed legitimate germination to you can cut down in 55 days. The Bobby's Widow, for example, 55 days. She doesn't get massively huge, but you get nice, dense, resinous covered buds. But Anvil, it can run up to 90 to 100 days. The veg period is longer. And of course, the flower period is about average, I would say, as far as like once it triggers over, out of pre-flower to actually flower out. But I'm working more with flower times with these long season photo periods that I'm seeing up here. Like there's going to be some projects that are going to be dealing with, not converting a specific photo period to an autoflower, but using traits that I like from those photo periods, like the mold resistance and stuff like that, into a new autoflower form. And then I also kind of want to work the other side and see if I can take some of the stuff that's, takes 12 weeks to flower and get it done and shorten that period of time for photo periods for this wet climate, like here or Michigan or even Maine. A lot of my market's New England, as well as, anywhere across the top of the United States is the largest part of my market.
Hey, I got a
Yes.
question. Oh, sorry.
No,
I was
you're
just gonna
fine.
say, I think that's powerful for as far as outdoor growing goes, autos, and maybe a little bit longer to go outside to get you a little bit extra yield when it's not really gonna take a whole lot more effort on your part, really, since you stick it in the ground.
Right.
But then again, you're pushing up against the short flowering photoperiod strains so it's still got to be shorter than that, but you know what I mean? I can understand the difficulty there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, pickleberry is a great example. I mean, that thing wants to start flowering it was middle of July. And I mean, I'm still at 14.5 now. I mean, I watch my daylight hours, watching these triggers because that's what I'm hunting specifically for. And to see that thing kick off in like middle of July and finish like second week of September, like it was done.
Nice.
Which is tremendously huge up here. So, like those are the kind of traits that I'm hunting down.
So if you take an autoflower, can you induce flowering by putting it into 12 and 12, or it has no effect on that because of its innate autoflowering, name?
I mean, I've run a few in 12-12 and I haven't seen it speed it up. What I've seen it do is like completely diminish your yield. There's something about the DLI that it needs and the intensity of the light it needs. Like from my experience, 15 hours or less, you're pushing it. Recommend, like if they're growing in a greenhouse out here, I always say, like, especially if they want to do 2 crops a year, light assist, get them at least 16 hours at a minimum in most greenhouses. But the biggest impact I've seen is yield. Now you can get them to flower a little faster. And I think Matthew and I were tossing this around a little bit in chat yesterday or the day before. Smaller root zone environment, contain that root zone environment. They tend to want to kick off a little bit earlier. And that's still some of the old rural traits that are in there too.
I noticed some people they complain about that it will flip soon, but they're often in like a small pot and they didn't transplant it. And that's why a lot of people then started suggesting go right into the final pot. And I think Dr. MJ in the past has mentioned often, you get more yield because you're giving it more light and it can accept that more light. Photosynthesis is happening. So it's going to generate more biomass, which is one of the big arguments for even like growing autos indoor. I think Daz, before he was with them, Mephisto, they were like, one of them was a photo period guy, one of them was an auto guy, and they tried to have a yield competition. And the photo period was a little bit better quality flavor, but the auto kicked his ass in the yield. So they're like, let's mix these together. And I was Mephisto's genetics was born. And so I think that there's definitely credence to trying to continue to push autoflowers forward because you can get a lot out of the lights. Although you have to run them longer, you can get crazy yields in pretty good time. So
yeah, absolutely. That's one of the biggest advantages, I think, especially when you're looking forward in terms of like the future commercial market, maximizing returns to space and to harvest window per space both of those autos have significant advantages there, but that's a big one. Being able to run the lights and power the plants and power photosynthesis for 18, 20, 24 hours instead of only 12 really changes sort of the quantum yield that you can deliver to your plants.
I want to go back and kind of highlight that chat that you referenced there, Dan, because I think it's more important than just glossing over, because the little detail you guys were getting into as far as media itself. Like, I think a lot of people looking into autos have heard the small pot thing, but I don't think a lot of people have heard that if you have a real heavy soil, that it acts almost like a small pot, and when that root gets that resistance, it can still kick it off. So some people might change their media and get better results just using a more loose media. So I just wanted to highlight that a little bit, because I think it was news to me. I hadn't really considered it. So it was something that I learned in your guys' conversation.
Yeah, I take it back to like the Siberian, where they come from. You know, that's a rocky terrain, it's rough terrain. And some people say maturity, other people say root zone. I still haven't been able to find a definitive between the two. But what I have seen is a heavy medium just stall out the growth, you know, and if it doesn't stall it out, what it'll do is it'll force it into flower. It can't move those roots as freely as it would like to get up into its best reproduction. And they just will convert right over to, okay, it's time to die out, either by we're not strong enough to do this, or we just want to survive. But like most of the time I panic, not panic, but I get concerned when I see barks in soil when people growing autoflowers, because that's a hard stop. That's a restriction. And if it's layered in there, and I mean, it's hard to tell which way you have it laying in the pot, depending on how you filled your pot. You know, I think that could be something that people should consider. One thing that Brandon has introduced to me was the rice hull game. Like, that was a game changer for me for both aeration as well as mulch. But like when it comes to the autos, lighter airier soil, if you've got a good organic soil, they don't need a lot of assistance in food, but teas. But if you're running something like ProMix, for example, that's a nice light one, and you have to feed that soil. If that's the only thing you have is like a ProMix HP, you know, start looking at feeding those plants light doses around day 3 or day 4.
It was interesting.
Yeah, well, I
Brandon,
think that, I mean, any plant, unless it's in a supplemented media, is going to need nutrients by the time it starts photosynthesizing.
Right.
Once its leaves are open and it's receiving light, the nutrients are support for those photosynthesis processes for all plants, and they need access to them. I often run up against people with transplanting autos. When I grow autos, I start them in small containers. But I pot them up pretty quickly into the final containers. And I really think that that's important to keep them growing as sort of quickly as possible to maximize the sort of root zone. And I think a lot of people start directly autos in larger containers, potentially because of some of the information or some of the thoughts that you shared. Just what's your thoughts about potting up?
So, I mean, honestly, my thoughts about potting up, I think you need to know your cultivar for one. Some guys have selected against the transplant shock that we used to see, that it's not as common. I personally start in final containers. I usually just leave them alone. And I've seen just as adequate growth from potting up as I have in the right container. I think it comes back to grow style. I do transplants myself personally because I'm looking for the ones that can be handled with gorilla hands. Not a lot of people can be gentle enough without breaking off either the main taproot or some of the side roots as they're doing the transplant. They're just not gentle enough with them, and they cause that stunting, and then it causes a lot of bad feelings either towards the whole genre of autoflowers or even the breeder himself or herself, whichever way that goes. But like,
I guess I just don't think that that's going to be any different with any other plant there. I mean, yeah, if you break the taproot during the transplant, your plant's going to suffer. If you break some of the side roots, it's not going to be that rough. But okay, carry on. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. And I agree with you. But the difference between the two is with the photoperiod,
Mhm.
you have recovery time.
Yes.
You can put it back into veg a little bit longer. You can, heal that
Yeah.
plant. But with the autoflower,
Right. But we don't transplant plants because it's going to take longer and require us to keep them in veg longer. We transplant photoperiods because it speeds them up and develops better roots. And I guess my point is that same principle holds for autoflowers too. As long as you don't get either plant root bound, I do agree that binding the roots will speed the plants to flower and produce smaller plants in the end. But I've heard that argument a lot come back with sort of like, okay, because you have time to recover, but I mean, I don't take time to recover. The plants, I do that so that they grow faster.
right? And I could see that. I definitely understand where you're coming from on that point. That's been always my take on it, my approach to it.
Well, I think you were almost saying like that if you were selling seeds like you are, so everybody else who transplants, maybe they're not going to do it perfectly. So you want to have the genetics that if they do get manhandled while they're transplanted, they might be able to continue to grow regardless of that. Not to say that it's always going to happen.
That's an awesome practice.
But one thing I wanted to question, because one of my listeners of the podcast, I can't remember who it is right off the top of my head, but they said they only bought autoflower seeds and only grow autos because they cannot control light leaks in their environment for whatever reason. And that they said, well, if they're going to have light leaks, then it's less important with autos and maybe potentially less hermes just generally. Is that something that you've come across or seen? It sounds like you selected for that. Like you said, sexual stability earlier. I was listening. I know it might have gone over some people's heads because you listed a bunch of things, but that is definitely one thing a lot of people care about. So do you think that there's less hermes in autoflowers, or is it just something that breeders have selected for to not get basically run out of the community?
I'm hoping that they're selected for sex stability. I think it's kind of important because if you want to produce something for either the home market or if you want to produce anything for the commercial market, I mean, nobody wants a seeded crop unintentionally. The light leak thing I do see is hold true. That's one of my stressing regimens is changing the light cycle up, change it down. Dramatic swings in the hours that it's on or the hours that it are off, potentially waking them up in the middle of the night, on and off times. It all goes through that, environmental and light change stress practices that I do for that. I don't want to say I see less herms in the autoflower community than I do with photoperiod community. I mean, I see it on both sides. And I think it's less light leak and more practice on what they're selecting for and based upon stress tests that they're putting them through.
Yeah, potentially other things. It just clicked with me. This person lives somewhere where power goes off so consistently. I'm like, should probably get a generator. But although they didn't have one, it was like if power is going to kick off for a few hours at a time, it'd be better if it's a autoflower than a photo for their sake. And so it was just a little easier for them. But like you were saying, it could be there's hermes on both sides, and it's definitely possible. So look out for them. I definitely have seen people grow autos that have hermed, and it might be. Not from light leaks, but maybe something else. Maybe it's too hot. Maybe it's too cold, or the humidity's off. There's a whole bunch of reasons. Like Kyle has done stress testing in the past. I think root binding or over and under feeding and a whole bunch of other stuff can bring it out. And I know, Kyle, are you in the process where you've started working with your genetics into Dan's, or how's the auto process going on your side so far?
Yeah, so I had some. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember way back. It's on my profile feed from maybe a year and a half ago or something. I was kind of messing with autoflowers, and it was just becoming really tough trying to excel in photo and auto by myself because I mean, I don't have partners and stuff. It's literally all just me. So I kind of took the gear that I was working on and kind of just packaged it up and put it away. And then I was just kind of chatting with Dan and. I said, hey man, I have some really good material. It's pretty unique. And I was in the just these really greasy stem rubs that just smell like cotton candy and blueberries. And I was just and he's like, yeah, well, send it my way and we'll see what we can do. And so I basically sent it over to him and he's been working with it right now. I think they just got pollinated within the last couple of weeks. And so he's really happy and I'm happy because, I look up to Dan a lot. So in regards to, what he does. So the fact that he didn't think they were shit meant a lot. So but yeah, that's kind of where we're at. So he's working on their pregnant. We're gonna guess Dan could probably speak more on it, but I think we're gonna see what that cross did and then kind of go from there, whether whether maybe it needs another back cross or whatever.
I just wanted to shed some light on the fact that auto breeding in general is not easy, but the auto part of it is not a simple process. Because I remember Kyle had a Pineapple Express auto that he really liked the pheno of, and then reversed it and ended up the reversals, like the S1s, were photoperiods. So he had this great pheno that he really liked the smell of, and then all the S1s ended up being like photoperiod. And Mephistos, I think, talked about they weren't seeing autos until F2 and like regularity until F3 when they were crossing out with the photoperiod. So their whole F1 generation would be pretty much all photoperiods, and not until F2 were they seeing some autos, and then by F3 they were stabilizing. F4 they were picking for traits and things like that. So I'm curious, does your experience kind of, I saw you nodding, Dan, along with that. So is it pretty similar when you try to outcross to a photo period?
100%. I mean, it's rare. I have seen them in the F1, but it's on very, 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 very high numbers of seeds that have been germinated. Personally, wouldn't select against that. But yeah, it's usually F2. You start to get a mix. F3, you're going to get, up to 75% of them are going to be, triggering into an autoflower trait. And then F4, you start picking four, you start isolating things, you start selecting things down. I started at F3 with the Afghani stuff because I saw a higher ratio autos coming out of that at that time. So it was interesting to see different cultivars behave differently with it. Yeah.
I would have imagined that Afghanis and fast flowering things you'd start to see it a little bit earlier. It kind of makes a little bit of sense with me. I remember DJ Short, I think, wrote about in his book and has mentioned a few times when he started breeding for his fastest flowering possible plant, he ended up making an auto unintentionally, and he bred a plant that he called No High. And I think, is your Bobby's Widow a CBD, the one that you said it finishes in like 50 something days, or is that a THC plant?
It's THC. I do have one that's a high CBG, but Bobby's Widow is a THC dominant plant. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome because typically, like in the past, the whole moniker would be the faster flowering typically didn't tend to have higher amounts of THC, but I think that might have just been his anecdotal experience with the line that he was working. I think he might have picked up a CBD line and not realized what it was because he called it No High. And CBD for a lot of THC users kind of feels like a no high if you consume it, the flower. So that was just a maybe old school story that doesn't necessarily stand up now with the current fast flowering high THC varieties that are available.
Yeah, I'd agree. You never know. I mean, who knows? It could have been mislabeled. It could have been anything. I mean, that happens quite a bit.
Speaking of the CBG, I haven't really messed around with. I see it in hemp a lot, and even auto-flowering hemp now. What is your kind of take on CBG as far as the experience of the user using it? And then just like, is there anything of note that you'd like to share about that?
I'm still trying to figure it. I mean, it was one of those things that shocked me on the test. It was something I had to go and try to educate myself about. Like I had heard, you hear a CBD, you hear THC, THCV, all the other variants. And when I saw CBG came out in a high, I know it's a precursor to THC and CBD. But from what I've seen with the gem line, it's more of a medical, people with migraines, people with vascular issues, ocular migraines, standard migraines, cluster headaches, things of that nature. It tends to be more beneficial to them. I can't make any medical claims, obviously, but this is the feedback I'm getting from, like, there's some patients that are growing it in Missouri. A few of my friends in Missouri have grown it, and he's getting it out to patients. It's one of the lines I donate the most to because, people need their medicine. But that's what I've seen as far as like anecdotal experience from a consumer side of it. I'm still learning about that, minor cannabinoid.
That's very admirable that you share it because it has that medical benefit. I think I wish more people did that in the community. I think sometimes people want to hoard it because they think it's special and valuable, but I think sharing it is really important. And Brandon, I think you had another CBG variety potentially that was high in CBG.
Yeah, the Great Aunt's Secret, that capulator bread, I actually found a cut, and it usually tests around 2.4% not THC, CBG. The concentrate, when it's made in the concentrate, usually tests around double that. So it's pretty awesome to have that. It's actually, I was talking about that particular cut with my lady earlier, and she was saying, hey, that's one of my favorite things. And I had crossed it with the Mac V2 and grown that out, and we were smoking on some of it. And I think that's one of the things that adds kind of more like I don't know what it is. For me, I feel like less anxious, I guess. when I smoke that variety, I'm more calm. Um, and it's not, but not like sedative type calm, just
Did
less.
you just do a bong rip of that one, Brandon? No, I'm just joking. Sorry.
I did.
New Yorkers talk fast, man. It's Oklahoma. You're living a slower lifestyle down there, Brandon. Bless you, brother. It's
I
you're
apologize.
smoking on that good. Nothing wrong with that.
I am smoking on some pretty good weed though. It's not bad, man. It's pretty decent.
I wouldn't expect any less over there. But yeah, CBG is definitely an interesting one. Do you have any research or anything of note that you'd like to share about it, Brandon? I know you dive down a lot of the rabbit holes and get into the white papers and all that good stuff. Ever since you found that cultivar, is there anything you'd like to share about it?
Not particularly, I didn't go down the cannabinoid rabbit hole like I do a lot of stuff. Most of the things that I'm looking at are, in all honesty, it's great when I see like high THC. I mean, honestly, that's like what you want to grow if you're doing commercial production. My personal preference is different than what I would do for commercial, and that's because what I like is different from usually what the market demands. So, I have to take that into consideration. I can't always be like, oh, I like this, so let's grow it. It doesn't always work like that. But I would rather have a wider variety of profile, higher terpene content, and I'm not super concerned about the THC content simply because, some people say that, oh, certain varieties have like a mentally stimulating effect. Like all cannabis does that to me. It all is like uplifting, mentally expanding for me. Some varieties do it better, and I oftentimes, if I find something that like I smoke a little bit of and it gets me to that like place where I'm like things are like connecting and I just feel in a better like conscious state, more comfortable. That's kind of like what I look for, because for me that's what I want. That's like what I do for my breeding stuff. As far as commercial production, like people look at testing. They want high THC. Terpenes don't mean too much. It's good if you have it just, oh man, it's all over the place. Some people do look at that if they know to look for that, but most people are looking for the marketing aspect. I think people want to see something that's repetitive. They want to associate it with a symbol. Having SKUs for packaging is really important. I'm just going on a tangent. I know we got totally off topic, but
You're right, though, about all of it. Do you think people will get wiser and educated and look at more than just the THC levels?
I sure hope so.
As soon as they grow their own, and that's why we do this.
Yeah,
That is a big part of why we do this.
How
But
how many people are going to continue to eat McDonald's and eat things that are that they know are bad for them and do things that are unhealthy versus
yeah,
people
I can think of
that
a few
are,
examples. Even in our community.
That's how it is. That's just how it is, right? Some people will go out of the way to educate themselves because they really want to understand and they really want to be independent, self-sufficient. That's why the home growing community is so tight knit, right? Because we also want to know how to be self-sufficient. The home grow community is also probably looking up, homesteading stuff and how to raise chickens and, like that, because that's all the stuff that we're into. So it's lifestyle, right? And so if you're marketing as a lifestyle brand and you want to have a mainstream appeal, then you have to appeal to the population, and so having SKUs and doing your marketing and imaging and just like every other thing that happens in modern day society, it is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Education is where we all like to focus because that's where we all want to be able to do, like, look, none of us are going to stop growing weed, right?
Never
Legally.
ever.
Well, we
No.
want to bring people to our level of understanding because we think it's important, but a lot of people just really don't care.
Don't
There are the
care.
people that drink the Bud Light versus the craft beer. We're the people that are like a connoisseur. We give a shit about where it's grown, who grew it, what it smells like, what it tastes like. A lot of people are like, I just want to get high. I want something that's going to help me fall asleep. I just want something that has 30% plus THC. So if that's what works for them, they're going to shop on that. And I agree with you, Brandon. It was poignant what you said. What you like isn't necessarily what the market likes. So you know that now and you've accommodated for it. You can grow strains that you happen to also enjoy, but it might not be your very favorite thing. It's like, oh, this one, yeah, it tests above 30% and it's also really good. So I'm going to grow that variety a bunch. But
Oh no, he could grow the one he loves the most and his, on his side. Yeah, I'm sure you're not gonna not grow the one you love the most, no matter what, right?
This is sort of
I agree with that.
related to even how I do my videos. For example, like as much as I know personally, and many people have told me this, and I've tried to do better about it, but like sometimes I'm just actually totally disinterested, or at least partially disinterested in only talking about like the basics. Like I want, as perhaps wrong-minded as that is, I want people to know things like the taxonomic names and stuff. At the very least, have a reference for it. So if they like see it in a research report, if they're happening to even care to do that, or have other technical information, they can have that context. So I'm a big believer in championing that. But I think one of the realities I've had to really understand, and I still come to grips with it every day, is that lots of people just don't care. And there's subjects I don't care about. And I am at a detriment for it, honestly, if I'm being very honest with myself. And you would think that'd be a motivator enough for me to like pursue that, but it isn't. And I guess that's the human condition, or it's just me. I don't want to project my problems onto everyone else like that. But
No, I see that, and you got to know your audience, and you got to speak to your audience too. Is
very true.
Speaking of that
goes part of it.
our
everything.
audience asked us a question. Lou Grown says, Cheap Home Grow, what are your opinions on Delta 8? Is it viable medicine for those in red states? Is it different when derived from THC, cannabis, or CBD hemp? That was from Lou Grown. And I'll jump in first and just say, if you can confirm with lab testing, it's Delta 8. Delta 8 is Delta 8. So whether it came from CBD or THC, a lot of people might think it's controversial. I believe that it's the same thing. Just like a lot of people don't accept pinene from a pine tree is the same as pinene from a cannabis plant. It's not sexy to believe that. But I do think that
it's not
the science.
Let's be more specific here so it doesn't even sound like it's, because the way you just said that makes it sound like it's up for debate. But let's just be real honest with ourselves here. The difference between hemp and cannabis is an arbitrary number that some politician picked.
Yeah.
The legal label.
I think where a lot of this comes from.
So if it comes from hemp or cannabis, it's the same fucking.
It's still
plant,
cannabis.
I agree, but there's like this. There's this surge from early CBD production where it was like a byproduct of hemp production that was like, and a lot of that shit was making people sick. So I think that's like a antiquated idea.
Factor, yeah.
So, but then would it be the Delta 8 or would it be something else that's in there? Like, I just think it has to be clean. You have to know
it would
where
have to be
from.
something else. Yeah, it wouldn't be the Delta. Delta 8 is great medicine.
I believe, like the actual single thing, like azadirachtin, for example, it can be effective as a pesticide, but it can also come along with a lot of other pesticides because the pesticides that were sprayed on the tree. So depending on where you source it, not all azadirachtin products are equal. Matthew has made me aware of this several times, and a lot of people champion them. A lot of people hate them. I am a little bit indifferent. I just like to realize that they're not all the same. So it's important to realize not all Delta 8 products are the same. You got to know where you're getting it from.
I
often like to say that. You go first.
Okay. I'm just going to be quick, and this is my, you've heard it from me before, but I'm more, when it comes to medicine, when it comes to healing, in my experience as a caregiver, and this is just my own anecdotal experience, I guess, but I'm doing this for years now, and it's the full plant medicine. It's the widest range of cannabinoids that seems to be the most effective, not doing the opposite and singling out one. When you start doing that, you start doing the same thing. And I'm not saying pharmaceutical is bad, but that's what the pharmaceuticals have to do, is they have to isolate like one single thing out, and then they can try to patent that, because you can't patent nature. So they got to make it different than what occurs in nature.
That's
why, like, these carts
compound from something else.
Yeah, yeah,
They
exactly.
can even do that, because you can't just get a patent on something that comes from nature. That's why natural medicine has been shunned by the institutionalized medical field, is because you can patent, you can make money off of
Commercialize it.
That's something that's a synthesized derivative of a natural compound that's been found in nature.
Yeah, and I think, nature does a real good job of putting these compounds in the right balances for us. And when you start messing with that, that's when you start seeing side effects, in my experience. So I understand you're in a special situation where you can't get the full plant medicine, but you could get hemp. You could get, hemp flower sent right to your door.
high terpene hemp too, which is,
yeah, I would smoke that,
or extracted even, like you do, make like high CBG and high CBD oils, and then like you can smoke the flower. There's terpenes in there. There's aromatherapeutic element. Some people refer to the entourage effect, and I do think that it is available in states where they have heavy metals testing, pesticide testing. There's a few different places that you can go and get it. They said, Lou Grown follows up with, do y'all know how Delta 8 is made? Personally, I don't, but I have heard that it can be made in a lab. So it's like something that you can synthesize from Delta 9 or CBD, from what I understand.
Possibly grown from yeast too. I know they're doing experiments.
Yeah, they're doing that with every
psilocybin too.
But it has to be synthesized though, correct? It's
what do you mean?
I'm not sure about that. I don't know if it can be found naturally in nature or if it was something
I
that was
think
product of a lab.
Extracted. It used to be extracted from hemp, because you could
It
grow
can
it as hemp.
definitely.
But
I'm
a lot of
sorry.
these states, like Michigan, they just passed a law where hemp can't that's being thrown in with a THC percentage now. So total THC percentages now, it's counting against them.
Yeah,
So
not just Delta 9.
I thought it was in nature, like in cannabis, but in small amounts, delta THC 8.
I think there's a real quick. I think there's a conversion process, because I age my cannabis before I make RSO, and one of the batches I made was 60% Delta 8, lab confirmed. And it wasn't anything special, but it was naturally produced. Now I think the plant probably only produced minimal amounts, but there was some sort of conversion process. Think of decarboxylation, but maybe not a carboxyl compound, maybe some other compound or something.
Well, yeah, you made it in a certain thing too with heat that might have maybe somehow changed it from Delta 9 to Delta 8. I don't know.
We consistently use heat, and this stuff had been inconsistently aged.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. The aging process is probably what you're thinking led to the Delta 8 jumping.
Yeah.
So it can be found naturally, and I definitely know it can be done in a lab. I know like hydrogenized cannabinoids was something they talked about on Hash Church for a while. One of the guys, like Dr. Mark, would come on and talk about he hydrogenized cannabinoids, and it was something that you can only do in a lab, but they like patented the process. And there are things that you can derive from cannabis that can only be made in labs, to his knowledge, and there's been no other published data to be shown that it's been found on a plant. But the hydrogenization process is something that's standard across many industries. So
I heard that the hydrogenated, I think it was hydrogenated, I think that's the right terminology, cannabinoids was they were quite potent.
Yeah, I think he's claiming that they are more potent. It's like the THCP and CBDP as well. Some of these newer cannabinoids might be more potent because they're found at such low amounts. I think, like Spartan was mentioning earlier, the full spectrum of cannabis, like that's why I think a lot of home growers love just the flower, or as full plant as they can have it in hash or oils or extracts, whatever it is. Those minor things that all add up, they all stimulate our cannabinoid system, our ECS, endocannabinoid system. So whether they're being pumped up by concentrates or breeding or whatever it is, certain people are probably going to respond well to specific ones. And I think it's interesting to see all the changes that are happening, because for so long it was, I think Delta 9 THC was the high target, and it still is to this day. We talked about earlier. I mean, it's got to have 20% plus, right? THC, or else most people won't buy it. 25 in places. I have one right now that's 35%, and I've seen 40% testing in California. So tests keep on going higher.
From
I
a
was just
medicinal
thinking-
standpoint, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, if the chemistry of the hydrogenated cannabinoid or whatever compound we're talking about, like perhaps it lasts longer, perhaps it has slightly different effects or something like this that helps with an ailment. You know, I think it just really depends on the context of its use.
I totally agree. If it has benefit, then let's use it. One thing I wanted to say earlier about Spartan's comment to the whole, using the more full spectrum. I have this little pen right here. I used to never ever puff on these. This is my wife's battery. It's pink. It's got a bunch of little weed leaves on it, so you can make fun of me if you want. But these things,
It's
I
got a
used to
card
say,
attached. This should be pink. I agree.
so it says like there's a meme out there. It says like the hand dryer. It's like never gets your hands completely dry, and then it show these and say never get you completely high. Well, with live resin and like high terpene concentrates, even like if you take distillate, I've had 99.9 THC distillate. It barely gets me a buzz. To the whole thing about Spartan was saying, isolated, it's like less of a medicine for me at least. Then when if you have 95% THC distillate and add 5% of a cocktail of terpenes for flavor and the other entourage effects, and even now like the live resin or rosin that's being put into carts, it definitely gives you a much different effect than even a higher percentage of THC. So that's, to me, kind of shows that you don't need to chase just the THC percentage personally for most people. The whole entourage effect, I think, is a very real and relevant effect.
I agree with you. I've tried the different carts. I've tried the rosin carts, and the flavor was better, but I still didn't get an effect from it. But I understand I got a higher tolerance, I'm sure. And I'm already probably predisposed to hate them. So
Yeah, I don't trust
maybe
what about
that's
what the manufactured
gotta
with the
affect too.
metals in them and stuff? I don't
California
trust
is very
any of
crazy
that.
about the
Yeah,
testing. They
okay.
test it when you put it into the cart. They test
Yeah,
it
it's
after
heavy.
you heat it up. There's like 3
Okay,
heavy metal
okay.
testing. So I got this from the legal market. My wife works at
There
a
you
shop
go.
or whatever. So we pay a little more for the safety. There's no pesticides, no heavy metals, none of the bullshit that you might get in an unregulated market. So I'm fortunate in that regard. So if you're in an unregulated market like this,
Yeah, you should be
individual live
fearful,
grown,
probably.
I would
Yeah.
not
was
trust
just
them. I would
thinking-
go flower only
Yeah.
personally, because even if flower with, like, I hate to say it, even if it has pesticides on it, the concentration is so much less and it's so much less dangerous. People smoked pesticides on cannabis for years. There's paraquat pot in fucking Mexico, and it was probably damaging to a lot of people and was not the healthiest thing. There's other pesticides. People used to spray all sorts of fucking harmful pesticides before people like Matthew Gates, thank goodness, and others spread information that you could use predator mites and organic other ways that are not so noxious. But people did consume some dirty cannabis for many, many decades, myself included. Fuck, I was in Cleveland. It's not like it was regulated then.
I'm
And
sure
that
I
shit
have
was,
to.
some of it smelled like a
Long
tire because it was
time,
in a
yeah.
tire.
But
Hey, can
I was
I
thinking,
go?
I've got one question, and I'm not even sure, but I think it's a good idea. But if I was in a red state, I would still just I would just order me some hemp, and I would concentrate it down. But if I concentrate that down and it did have trace amounts of THC, do you think I could get into trouble to get my THC percentage up high enough in, say, an RSO or something, to be skirting the law there or not?
I don't think so, because like my brother lives in Ohio still, and he's in a county at least where the cannabinoid percentage 0.3 versus 1%. They can't test it that fine. It's either positive or negative at most police departments. It's too fine of an equipment. An HPLC machine, those are like 50 grand on the old minimum end. So for them to be able to test it fine enough to say, this is not hemp, this is cannabis or whatever, most of these places aren't even prosecuting minor cannabis crimes, thankfully, because of the hemp farm bill and all that's happened since then.
Oh, then that's 100% would be my hack. Then I would I would go to a trusted, find a source, maybe go and order an eighth off of every website until you find the flower that you really like. I'm not affiliated or anything, but the ones that I go to is called Happy Buds, I believe, Buds with a Z at the end. And because they had the test results, I could easily skim through. And what I would do is I would just pick 4 or 5 different varieties that have the widest range. So you're pulling in as many of these cannabinoids as you can, and then put them all together into a concentrate. Now that could be something like just making butter and making edibles, or you can do an oil, or you can do an alcohol wash and do an RSO. But that's what I would do. You're getting everything but THC. So it's still very, very medicinal. And that's the way I would approach it, because then you're not even breaking a law. You're not putting anything at risk. And you're just going full medicine. That's the route I'd go. And this stuff's really cheap. You can buy trim from Happy Buds. You can even buy trim, and you can get pounds of trim for pretty cheap. You're just doing extracts. So it should work just as fine. It's got tests to come with it.
Skilbo, I think, uses that for some of his roller balls and stuff. And I've recommended it to many of the Cheap Home Grow listeners, and they've actually all been satisfied with it. So I would, like I said, I'm not sponsored by them either, but it is nice to at least have a credible source that a few of us have tried and had success with. And I think Tao and Dr. MJ wanted to jump in there as well. Maybe Doc first.
I did.
Oh, I don't know. I saw your thing.
I'm just sitting here. I'm like, wait, what the hell? Okay.
Okay. The
I have to
American
talk
one was,
now.
Yeah.
Get ready. Get ready. Hurry up. No, I'm just enjoying the show, man. I'm happy.
I was gonna request to hijack the topic for a second. And Matthew Gates recently posted an amazing post on IG. I was gonna ask him. So if I understand correctly, Matthew, they had a big ass petri dish and they put like 2 other little petri dishes in, one with roots that had mycorrhizal hi-fi growing on it, and one with nutrient, and the in between was inert material, and the mycorrhizal hyphae found the nutrients and brought it back to the plant by going across the inert media, and it ended up doing that. Am I correct? Is that correct?
You mean the one that I posted today?
Yes.
So in that one, it was about how basically a mycorrhizal fungus, that lovable scamp Rhizophagus irregularis or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, that very common one. They were testing to see, because that fungus can secrete, as I understood in the paper, it and other mycorrhizae and other fungi for that matter that are beneficial to plants, they can secrete enzymes like chitinase to break down chitin, right? Like a very common organic matter, whether it's from fungi that are decaying and dead, or whether it's from like insect or arthropod exoskeletons and body parts, which are super common in the soil, right? That can be a source for nitrogen, specifically ammonium and nitrate. And although the fungus has the ability to break this down, seemingly it just doesn't do this. And in cases where there was a protist,
Bacteria.
a bacteria and a protist.
Okay.
Both of them. And so the bacteria had chitolinic enzymes that it would produce, and that would break down the chitin. But then also that wasn't enough either. It was the combination of the bacteria that breaks down the chitin in this example, and also a protist that comes in. And I guess it also, I think it grazes actually on the bacteria itself, and that sort of, the necromass that people like to mention in the microbiome, that also contributed to the nitrogen uptake by the fungus and transference to. Well, actually, no, the transfer itself, the uptake difference between having just it by itself and the bacteria plus the protist was like 65% more.
Okay.
And so the interesting thing here, I guess, is that was wondering why exactly that was, if the fungus had all the capabilities to do it. And I guess part of the reason for this is because essentially it's more efficient this way. It's just way more costly for the symbiotic or the mutualistic fungus to do everything, rather than having the bacteria and the protist kind of, do their first processing and then have the fungus come in
mouth to your digestive system.
Exactly.
The way that I visualize it in my mind is like this, right? So you have a mycorrhizal fungi who lets a role play out between a bacteria who is mobilizing a nutrient by sequestering it, and then having something consume that so that it becomes and stays in an available form for that fungus to sequester and either utilize or bring into the plant itself.
But it did go across inert media, right? Is that wrong, or is that part of that experiment?
I'm not sure what part
Okay.
I'm not remembering that part, but that doesn't mean it wasn't part of it. I might not have
Okay.
I just might not be remembering. I do
No
remember though
worries.
that one aspect of it that was interesting, since you mentioned that part, I do remember that like it was a sort of a convoluted research or sorry, sort of experimental setup. It was
Right.
it's very difficult to kind of like isolate and have these sort of processes kind of happen. It's very hard to like replicate what happens in like the field essentially. So they had to do a lot of things, and that could have been one of that aspect of like testing the difference.
Right. I think that's how it did it. But yeah, I'll take another look.
I know
But
there's
it's
a
just
lot.
amazing in general how that because I know it traveled though, and the root was nowhere as near the nitrogen, and it made it to the root petri dish. See, that's what basically happened.
I just have a question about general like cannabis science coming up right now. Isn't it going to be easier for us to have comparable to nature a thing as many people are growing either indoors or in a controlled climate greenhouse? So if you know, okay, like Brandon grows in a soil bed of X amount of size, you can do comparative studies at those temperatures and in soil beds of that size. And I think we're gonna have more and more good research coming out. Like there's just so many big business people and universities that are throwing money at this now, trying to maximize yields, cannabinoid yields, both the flower yield and cannabinoid and terpenes and everything like that. Like the University of Guelph study was one where they examined a drought stress in week 7 versus a normal controlled condition, and they actually saw a rise in cannabinoids. So that was just one example of many studies that can be done, like the one that the American one and Matthew were just talking about. And it'll be interesting to see how they're applied moving forward. Like, will they be able to come out to Brandon's greenhouse and throw a petri dish down, examine it like a week later, and like use that as part of a scientific study? And how are we going to start seeing the stuff applied? I'm really curious.
It would be really difficult, right? Because some of the things that are going to be living in soil are only going to be able to live for short periods of time. Things that can't be isolated in a lab that are living off of maybe like a certain root exudate. There's all different, or maybe some type of organic carbon compound that's in the soil. There's so many different, things happening, and you're not always going to have the biology changes just like the chemistry changes, as hydrology changes, as pH changes. All of those factors not only change biology, they affect the chemistry as well. So you would have to set up parameters where the moisture levels are the same, the water tension is the same, the temperatures, the humidity. I mean, it would be a massive amount of data to try to be able to collect. And when it comes down to it, working in a lab setting to try to get a definitive result doesn't always equate to what works in field application.
That's really true. And, what we're really talking about doing by growing indoors and conducting tests is controlling variables. And that's something that I'm actually working on doing. I got a guy coming out in Oklahoma. We're going to do some cannabinoid versus growth pattern testing. So I'm excited about that. So it definitely exists. It's possible, but replicating field circumstances, damn near impossible.
Usually I think it's much more effective to try to like answer a simple question, and then we have to make all results, the researchers make interpretations of that, and then they have those interpretations, and then we build on those inferences, right? But they're based on the evidence that they see. So like, for example, instead of asking a great big question that would require like so many massive like variables to be controlled and then like different replications to be made, you can answer a different question that's much more succinct and easy to like in a controlled situation, and then you kind of broad, that you broadly interpret that to other things. But there are of course pitfalls with that, and so it's kind of always sort of a cautious interpretation. That's why people tend to not say we have proven X. It's more that the evidence seems to indicate X, or they say that this is what happened, and so therefore we believe this. Like, for example, in the paper, I'll just quote a small section that says, because I have here on the Instagram post, that so the mycorrhizae can actually take nitrogen from organic sources such as plant litter or chitin, sometimes transferring part of this nitrogen to the host plants, even as they compete with those plants for limited soil nitrogen under other circumstances. They go on to say that it long has been assumed that other soil microbes play important roles in mineralization and or further processing of organic nitrogen before it can be taken up by the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungal hyphae, similar as in the case of organic phosphorus. Furthermore, bacterial grazers have been posited to facilitate release of nitrogen to the soil solution as free ammonium ions from the microbes they ingest. And then I cut off the sentence after that. But if you want, you can totally take a look at the report. It's on my Instagram channel.
I think to bring us back to maybe soil, I think that Dan is a soil grower himself. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about your just cultivation methods. I know we talked about the breeding a lot earlier. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about your grow with the listeners out there.
Yeah, majority of my stuff is either organic in a hugelkultur style bed, outdoor, or I use organic bag soils. I used to mix my own for quite some time, and then I've gotten thrown in the mix with Bio 365. Work with them quite a bit, actually, doing some testing with autos to try to help them refine their blend for autoflowers to get more of an autoflower geared soil. It's all organic. I use dry amendments, especially in the indoor. There's not much I really actually have to do to the Bio 365 except for feed it like castings tea I'd say about weekly, and that's basically my practice is water only and compost teas. Not a lot of big science behind it. I haven't dived down the rabbit hole as far as like Brandon has, obviously. I try to watch and gather as much information as I can from him. But yeah, my practices are less overhead as possible, let the soil do the work for the root zone and for the plant.
You're in a greenhouse, I believe it looks like out there.
I
with
am.
some, like, is it straw or what kind of mulch cover are you using?
So in the greenhouse this year is actually in 20-gallon pots. I was trying to keep the plant smaller and that didn't happen. What I think actually happened was the root zone grew through the bottom of the pot, through the actual straw into the soil that was there previously. That soil, of course, has been amended 2 years deep, 2 previous grows, no-till style farming inside there. And then I did the Bio 365 in those pots this year. A lot of top dressing, given the fact that we're 20-gallon pots and it was a long season for me. I think I started second week of May with those, and they actually outgrew the greenhouse. I had to do a lot of super cropping to the center row. We got way out of control.
How early do you typically go out where you're at planting wise?
Planting wise, I usually wait until I get about I can get out as early with my photo periods here is like the second week of May, easily. We're usually somewhere in the neighborhood. We're higher than 14 and a half hours of daylight. That's basically what I watch for that. We get super long days here. We get 15.59 hours, through the middle of June. And from that point on, which is a struggle up here because, we don't start flowering until super late into the season. And we're always up against the wet weather.
We've got a question. It says, many people might be surprised to know that you advise growing multiple plants in a single container with some cultivars. How did you arrive at that practice?
So the multi-potting, that's what I call it. It's where I take a large container, usually anywhere between 10 to 20 gallons, and I'll plant up to 10 to 11 different seeds in that pot, and then call the males out or, keep them in there for the breeding practice. It was mainly to see a bunch of phenotypical expressions for my breeding program. When I was working with the first few farms out here, I suggested it in their 30-gallon pots because I wasn't working on feminized seed at that time. I was doing strictly regular autoflowers. And what that would allow to do is enough room for that plant to actually start and grow in there, pull the males out without doing any kind of major damage to the females that were residing still in the pot. And that's basically how I arrived at that practice. And what I've seen from breeding in that style is they do extremely well in garden beds or indoor beds, like Brandon's beds that he uses. Like I see a lot of guys going to beds inside their tents where there's no competition for resources in the soil.
That's a good point. I've seen some people growing them in like intercrops with like fruit and vegetables and stuff and actually having good success. So that speaks to its, ability to thrive in that setting. And I think even just like going back to the whole ruderal thing, Brandon, when he first started working with ruderalis, I think was Guardian of the Lost Terp sent him some from like actual like over there in Russia that maybe hadn't been messed with at all. And his soil was so hot that like only the males survived, I think. It was like of 50, I think like only a few made it, if I remember correctly, Brandon.
Yeah, those seeds didn't really appreciate a nice fertile soil. They wanted to grow in basically dirt. So they didn't want water. They didn't want anything. They didn't have a whole, a whole lot of need for what we typically feed our cannabis, which is super, hungry for everything, it seems like. So the autoflowers, the ones that, I noticed that they're going to still need the same requirement. They're not, I think the thinking about autoflowers is because they're going to finish faster, this and that, but you can take a clone out of an arrow cloner and put it into a pot that would be the same size. And if you flip that at the same time, it's going to still require the same amount of nutrition, right? So there's no real drastic reduction in need for nutrient. So you still need a good quality soil. And if you know that your plants are going to go 100 days, you need to make sure that if you're in a soil pot that's going to have enough nutrition to go the whole length of time. I think there may be a misconception about autoflowers not needing as much nutrient, but the fact of the matter is cannabis all around is a pretty heavy feeder. And if you're not meeting a specific nutritional requirement, and I see it in like tissue testing, right? I want to see a certain percentage of calcium, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and then I want to see a certain ppm of all the micronutrients. And it's across the board. Even if it was an autoflower, being able to meet the nutritional needs is going to still help bring out the potential of that plant. So you don't want to like just go into it assuming that you could do a photoperiod and kind of skimp too and get decent results, but if you're giving it everything it needs, you're going to get the best results.
It's a great point. I think I wanted to give Keystone Cops a shout out for the question that we read earlier about the multiple plants in the same container. Crack Babies DWC, a regular listener, commented that they grew 4 plants in one tote one time, and they ended up with basically one giant root mass. 3 plants made it to the end, and they had to call one male, but it ended up working out. So it's definitely a possibility for plants to share their root zone and root mass and still have success as long as it's fed proper.
In my garden too. Right now I have in those same sip containers I've been running forever. I said to myself, fuck it, I've never really tried it in these containers before. So I've got right now in flower, I have a container with, like I usually grow, with just one Spartan glue, the thing I've been growing forever. So I know that plant. And then I have another one with 2 in there. And then right next to them, I have containers with 4 GG4s in the container, 1 in each corner. So I'm just going to see what happens. Right now, I don't know, early flower, but so far they're fine.
I think we run 270 plants per bed, and there's 22 sections. We're doing right now, I think, 6, 9. We're doing 13 plants per 4x4 section. So we're sharing a
That's
decent
pretty
amount of
dense.
space.
One thing I wanted to comment on, Brandon, I think a lot of the earlier thought patterns with autoflowers not needing a lot of nutrition was before the heavy hybridization that's going on these days. Earlier on, I could see that because the ruderalis, the root trait is feral. And those things, like some of the research I've been doing on like the old school, the original ruderalis, is these plants showed up in areas that had like massive damage or to the actual area where they were grown. They came back in to kind of restore that area before the natural vegetation could come back and healthily grow and restore that area. Kind of like morels do after a burn up here. Like, we go hunt morels on burn paths because they come back in to start reworking that area. And I think with the hybridization, we're seeing the actual demand increase because they're getting bred more into their photoperiod cousin. So initially, I'd say 7-8 years ago, I could see a low demand, and Jeff Lowenfels preaches that too in his book. They do need, they tend to have a lower requirement, but at the same time, I see the complete opposite of what you were talking about. Is like the newer hybrids that I've been working on. The more that I work them, the nutritional demands have increased dramatically than 7-8 years ago.
It's cool that you can see it and trace it over time just by breeding it. And I think that does come from being more photoperiod represented within that auto. You've captured what you want, which is the auto flowering trait, but you're also getting a lot of those benefits from the photo that you were looking for, or essentially just maybe the potency, whatever it is. It's cool to see that it's changed over time. And that's one of the beauties of being a breeder. You directly have an influence over not just the color, but also other things. So I'm glad to see it changing.
Yeah, he mentioned something really important there in terms of sort of being feral plants. A lot of wild plants would really suffer under the amount of fertilization that we grow most cannabis plants under. And a big part of sort of what primarily the photoperiods have been selected for over decades now has been high production under a nutrient intense regime. And that's really what we're used to. We're used to growing, and we use a lot of fertilizers, whether you're growing organically or synthetically. We're all using sort of a lot more fertilizers than you would use on other plants, unless you were growing another like high producing commercial domesticated crop, like maybe tomatoes or something, where you're really sort of, the plants have been selected for that. So it is possible for more feral plants, certainly, and also for some landrace plants to be a little bit more susceptible to high levels of nutrients.
I always like to mention to people that that like the sort of like landrace cultivars and things like ditchweed, like that's how ditchweed gets the stereotype that it has, right? Is that we select for the cannabinoid and the terpene content, and it's not that they don't have those in those plants as well compared to the cultivated plants, but it's at a much lower level. Like we are definitely selecting for something that natural conditions tend to not. And I think that's really important when people have a perspective that they're doing something the natural way. But like their cultivars, I mean, that's true of just about every cultivar of a plant that humans grow, right? Like they are demonstrably different. Domestication phenotype.
Well, that's like the definition of domestication is, are they demonstrably different than their wild relatives? And has that selection produced sort of discernible changes in one population vis-a-vis the natural population? And do those changes make it more appealing for whatever reason to the cultivators? So yeah, there are different stages of that and different things happen, but absolutely, Matthew. And one of those things is we breed plants to respond better to fertilizer inputs, and then they end up requiring it, but that's sort of the method to growing the fastest, highest producing crops.
It is interesting that sativum means cultivated. It also is like shown as sativa in certain varieties. So cultivated varieties, whether it's corn, which I kind of wrote in a comment to myself over here to not forget, cannabis grows really well in cornfields. I've seen that. Growing up in Ohio, people would chop down a little bit of the corn, throw down some cannabis seeds. It would grow up, and sometimes the fields were big enough that the farmer wouldn't even notice it, and they'd be able to go and get themselves a little crop, and it grew very well. And to go back to like Clackamas Coot. I know him and Brandon had a little intellectual debate, but one thing he put me onto was what people call the Coots mix. If you do it properly, he sometimes will misquote how much like the salt to put into the mix or whatever. But if you read the recipe, it's based off of what's called the Cornell mix, which is soil that works for a lot of plants that are cultivated plants, which is a third aeration, a third compost, and a third Canadian sphagnum peat. And then he adds like a few amendments and other things to make like that last like 1% roughly. And it works very well for corn and cannabis and lots of other things like tomatoes that we do cultivate more agronomically intensive than they would be if they were wild grown for sure. But thankfully, humans and their craftiness, we've kept good seeds that we've cultivated for years and produce better than the ones that we found out in the wild. And I don't know, I think that overall it's for the greater good. We're getting stuff that people are selecting for, like you can, make seeds that produce purple plants that have a certain flavor and a certain high pretty much every single time, which it's awesome to see the consistency.
No, have any of you ever heard of the Three Sisters Indian story about the three plants you plant together? Is there anything? Okay, has there
Mesoamerican trilogy? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Has anybody found out anything about planting with cannabis that would help, cannabis along and maybe another plant?
There are many people who will
to that effect though.
To that effect, well, hold on. I work with those farmers. I mean, that's really true. My primary expertise is I work with farmers who grow what they call milpa, which is corn, beans, and squash in tripartite intercropping. And it's an ancient sort of custom of letting the corns grow up, the beans climb up the corn stalk, and the beans help fix nitrogen. The squash acts as ground cover and mulch and prevents, excessive evaporation and erosion. They grow very well together, and farmers are still harvesting them together. The farmers that I'm working with, a lot of them are switching over to modern varieties of corn, in particular, those who are still trying to grow corn commercially. And switching over to modern varieties of corn means that you start using nitrogen fertilizers, and they will usually remove the beans, not grow beans intercropped with that corn. They switch over to like machine harvesting in larger fields, which isn't conducive to intercropping and all the rest of this. So this is exactly sort of the rub with advancing sort of particular plants and breeding plants that require those inputs or that do better with those inputs, is then it sort of ushers in a very different style of agriculture. So growing intercropping for those reasons, like having one plant trying to fix nitrogen for another plant, if what you're doing is trying to produce a big harvest, it's a hell of a lot more efficient for most farmers to just supply a secondary source of nitrogen as opposed to develop it ecologically within their own field. And that's obviously got some rubs, right? Because you go from like the Mesoamerican trilogy, which is those three crops grown together for thousands of years in fairly stable patterns of ecological agriculture, being pushed out by, monocrops with nitrogen inputs and other inputs and oftentimes machine harvesting. This is a big sort of thing that's happened in all sorts of other kinds of agriculture. And I think we're pushing up against some of these issues in cannabis as well. You kind of, I don't know. I've said a lot. I'll let you guys.
I don't know if any of that exists. I was about to ask you to encore and tell people about that story you told me, if you're comfortable with it, about the friend of yours you left a jacket.
Oh, this wasn't actually me. This is somebody else's story.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood.
Yeah. So no, sorry, but Matthew and I were talking about sort of the prime directive questions, which is another interesting side of this. As an outside sort of scientist or as an outside advisor, what do we do in those situations? Like, what do I do with the farmers who are asking me questions about, should I continue to grow milpa or should I switch over and use this, modern variety of corn with nitrogen fertilizer? Do we get involved with these things or not? And a lot of people, that prime directive thing comes from a Star Trek, where you're like not supposed to engage with other people, or you're just supposed to like observe without influence. Most anthropologists, when they go into the field, they recognize that they are going to influence the people that they work with. And people often sort of give us a hard time about that and say like, oh, you shouldn't be, corrupting these pure cultures and changing the way they do that. But oftentimes the people themselves really want to change. I mean, the people themselves see some of the cool things that we have, and they want to find out how they can get them and stuff. So one anthropologist tells this story of doing field work in Tibet, I believe, with Sherpas and the Sherpa culture. And he left one of them, after doing field work with him, his Gore-Tex jacket, which the guy really appreciated having. And he took a picture of himself with his friend with the Gore-Tex jacket on and was showing it off to some people back here in the United States. And somebody commented that, and they said, oh, it's too bad they used to use traditional clothing and now they're using this Western clothing. And the guy's like, he loved that jacket. You want me to tell him to get back in a yak skin? I mean, he's like warm in that jacket. He loves it. And it's really selfish of me to like deny it from him, because he would look better in a yak fur for your coat. So yeah, that's it.
It speaks to society getting upset about things that aren't even involving them. They're looking like, oh, tradition should be kept. But this guy's like very thrilled about the fact that he got something that's warm. It's not like it destroyed the entire culture, in my opinion.
Exactly.
Some people look at it that way.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's complicated. And if you're looking to help people, it's a really good idea to sit down and really talk to them and figure out what they want.
We have a few good questions from Potent Ponics that I want to get to. If I think now would be a good time to throw them in there. Is there any documentation of the Three Sisters root biology? Always wondered that. And Brandon says his phone is going to die. LOL. Hopefully, Brandon, if you do have to give your final sign out, maybe now would be a good time. And then,
yeah, my phone's about to die. I don't have a cord that's big enough to reach. So I'll see you guys next week, and always fun being here. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks for joining us, man.
And if you want to see more of Brandon's content, he recently went live with somebody on his Instagram, rest.brandon, where they talked about bricks and sap analysis, which I thought was really interesting. So you should check that out. That just happened right before this podcast, in fact.
Also saw some cool products over at Bokashi Earthworks. He's got a cool little setup there showing off all the products. I personally love Micro Plus and Amino N Plus. So shout out to Brandon and Bokashi Earthworks. You can find him there on Instagram as well, and his website, where you can get merch and seeds and all sorts of good stuff. So cheers, Brandon. Thank you so much for joining us. Potent Ponics also said, would be curious if there are specific root microbes that evolved for those three crops, which is an interesting thing I'll throw to the panel. I'm going to do a share screen about something that is interplanting with cannabis that I find interesting while you guys talk.
I could totally see that, especially through domestication and cultivation processes, that sort of consistency, having them together would absolutely have some sort of an influence. But like, I think it becomes a question of what your definition kind of is for like being like associated, because, and I think this is also a key point to make with cannabis. As much as I like to hem and haw over the fact that, these symbioses are often very gene-based, they're often very specific. It's not that there's only going to be one or two good microbes, that'll create an intimate, like mycorrhizal relationship, for example, or like very like epiphyte or endophyte, like into the cell interaction. But at the same time, there are lots of generalists, and there's also beneficial microbes that aren't like, they're not just like things that kill pests and things that are mycorrhizal or rhizobial or whatever, but there are those that are going to just kind of hang around in the root zone area, the rhizosphere, but also maybe even a little bit past that. And, there's a gradient of things that can happen. So I think it'd be really awesome to see if there were some that are like very specific to like maybe those families, or at least those like cultivation plots perhaps, or what's the cavalcade of different microbes that you kind of see generally. And there's been some really cool research about cannabis microbiome forays. I cite as much as I know about that, or many of the papers about it, in my Global Integrated Pest Management Review 2019, where I talk about cannabis evolution and pest host dynamics. It's pretty fascinating.
It definitely is. And I recommend people to check out the Zenthal YouTube channel when they have some free time. That's a great video. I've watched it like 2, maybe 3 times at this point. I'm showing off a video here from Mendo Dope for those who don't already know. I'm a big fan of them. They're up in Northern California. You can see they're outdoor growers, but I've been showing some clips where they have some crops interplanted within their cannabis, but they're also, like Dr. MJ was mentioning earlier, it's not like they're using them for like nitrogen, for example. They were still pouring compost and different organic amendments into their soils, but they're doing their interplanting more to attract things like, I think I saw dragonfly, butterflies, bees, other pollinators and things like that. So it's just cool to see. I've actually had the pleasure of trying some of the product from Green Shock Farms, which this guy Mark right here runs Green Shock Farms, and it had 7% terpenes in a lab test, and I could definitely vouch for it. It stank up the whole room when you open up the jar. Great flavors. Got to try the POG, the passion orange guava, pheno of their tropical sleigh ride. So these guys are killing it out there. I'd love to see more people getting into this. I know a lot of people like Dem Pure and others have gotten more into like the interplanting. You see different flowers just all around their gardens, and I'm not doing the greatest job of finding the spots where you can actually see, like, here's a bee.
Oh, you see that flower, that white flower? Actually, this could be a teaching moment. Do you mind pausing on that white flower?
The one with the dragonfly, or
the one right before you saw the bees?
You're not talking about the clover, are you?
Yeah, I was talking about the clover.
Oh, okay. The white Dutch clover.
I'm sorry, actually. So like, it doesn't matter now that you've all done that. I guess clover is pretty well known. I just just going to mention that
cover crop usually.
For sure. I would like to point out then that something a little bit maybe more useful is that a lot of pollinators out there are flies. Fun fact. Perhaps way before bees were a thing, certain flies were the pollinators du jour. And I just want to say that for those who are into the regenerative agriculture space, having banker plants and seeing things like small little flies and long-legged flies, and even some that you might think look kind of like house flies, they're actually, they lived in nature. They're a natural organism, and they can be really, really important for pollination of all kinds of native plants. And recently, I think Beyonce got into a little bit of a problem with a lot of the ecologists out there that know that honeybees, not to bogart the convo, they negatively outcompete native bees and other pollinators. And so she was like making some point about saving the bees, but the bees that people think of are honeybees, but honeybees are not they're like cattle, they're livestock. Saying save the bees, saying save the bees is akin to saying save the cows, or save the pigs. It's not really something you got to worry about much.
But also save the cows and pigs, though.
But also eat them. No,
they are tasty.
Yeah.
I do want to just add my support to the pollinators. One of the first things I put in my backyard was just a pollinator bed. So it's got like echinacea, and that one was the one that surprised me the most. That gets the most like diverse amount of just all kinds of, there's always something buzzing around those. But then it's got all my herbs, you get thyme and rosemary and sage. My sage went nuts this year. I can't think right now, but there's just everything just in there. Dill was one. And dill brings a lot. Dill brings a lot of like the little hoverflies or whatever. They like to sit on the top of those. And
totally agree.
And I have my outdoor right next to that on purpose.
That is nice.
Cool. Yeah, borage is another good one too. Borage brings in a lot of pollinators, and it's pretty. It's diverse. And I do a lot of interplanting in the hugel bed. A lot of my autos go out there in between the tomato plants and the broccoli. I use 2 or 3 different types of clover. And I get a lot of the different flies that I've never seen before. I think, Matthew, I had to ask what I think it's a huntsman or a hunter fly was because I
yeah.
had never seen a fly eating another insect. It was the first time that I had ever seen it. And it wasn't until I was really diversifying that crop out there that I was actually able to see these new species. You know, I get plenty of dragonflies. I put perches up for them. They like to perch in the middle of the garden.
Borage
really
high
cool.
in silica, good for FPGAs.
Also, borage is one of the like only like edible flowers that are like a blue color. You know, they're very common. I think is often used in confectionaries and also in just culinary use to add a little bit of blue to a dish.
I was
All
gonna say
right.
another
Well,
pollinator is milkweed. They give out milkweed seeds around here to try and reestablish the butterfly population. I guess a lot of butterflies like milkweed apparently. But
I was
they
just
have
gonna say
council meetings.
that the only plant I heard was associated with cannabis is holy basil. Someone claimed that it can increase terpenes.
I've heard that about
And
lemon balm too, like
I'll
lemongrass.
say also
basil
say
and
save a
tomatoes.
tree, eat a beaver. We must protect the forests.
All right, and that was the Lorax. Thank you, Lorax.
There you go.
Well, hey, there's some beaver extract and some, I think, blueberry concentrates, right?
That is correct. No, vanilla, I think, right?
I don't think that's what Todd was getting at.
I know, but it is interesting nonetheless.
No, beaver meat is good.
Can't say I've tried it personally.
Tail,
But,
though, is a little rough.
The tail, that's pretty
Beaver
rough.
tail. They like, yeah,
Like a well-done
they pack in the
steak.
mud. They pack the mud with the and the
With that
beaver
tail,
dams.
I had a
That's like
question
my
about
friend. Oh no, keep going. We should probably be relevant.
I was gonna say
Doesn't
it was not
beaver-
cannabis relevant, but Spartan was talking about rosemary, and I love alpha pinene, and I know rosemary even in veg when I pull it off of like plants, they grow it around here, but I think it's like a Spanish blue rosemary if I'm remembering correctly. I'm curious if you know what variety you grow, Spartan.
No idea. I have to buy a new one every year because it dies in Michigan. So I just buy whatever I find at the greenhouse. And I
Does
throw
it
in
flower
there.
or does it just stay like spiky?
No, it just stays like an evergreen looking plant the whole time.
So it flowers here and it turns blue. But I actually personally prefer like when I'm walking, one of my clients has a dog and I'll pet the dog when I come in. My hands start smelling like a dog, you know, not the greatest or whatever. I go on the walk with the client and there's rosemary all around. You could just pull like even like a few inch thing, which actually could you use as a cut. You can go plant that and grow your own plant or whatever. But if you just rub that between your hands, you'll smell in your hands. It's like very strong alpha pinene and other pinene. And it's just like a very wonderful aroma. It's used in culinary for sometimes the aroma and flavor. It's a amazing plant. A lot of Italian people are
That's
probably
why I
not,
plant it.
I'll
every
vouch
year.
for that.
And you're right, man. It takes like a few tines to season the whole dish, man, because it's so strong. Especially doing a soup and it's going to chill in there for a while.
it's funny because that is planted all around this one neighborhood, and I'll see like there's a big tree next to it. So like one spot will literally be getting light depth by the shade of a tree. So the whole middle of the bush will be flowering, and the left and the right side of the bush are still in veg. So I'm like, this is really like a interesting phenomenon once you start growing cannabis. And I didn't know shit about cultivating anything until I grew cannabis. So cannabis has taught me about all these other plants, and it's cool to see the high amounts of terpenes. I guess alpha pinene is one of the most common in nature. So it's makes sense that you find it a lot in rosemary. So
I've definitely inadvertently depped cannabis plants before too, so I know that is possible. They don't. It's just like a level in certain strains that once they reach that threshold, they're like, "Yeah, this is darkness to me. Let's flip it."
it's amazing the shade response. Like some plants will stretch, some and flower. So it definitely has a big factor.
I gotta tell you, I'm in love with growing outside though. I wish I could do it. You know, I wish I could do it more. I'm just kind of stealthily half-assed and, you know, hoping I can get the harvest with this thing. But I mean, to watch this thing just be its own self and be a badass, it's just fucking awesome. To sit
The
there and
stalk
watch.
on that thing is huge, Sport. And I saw
Dude.
that on the IG. Like, look at the stalk.
It's
I'm
so
like, wow.
stupid, man. I've done nothing, man. It's like I've stripped a plant when it started to get some PM spots on it, and it's all I've done. And it's been, I mean, I thought for sure I was going to go out there and just see loaded up with, you know, just go out there and start cutting branches off. But
Right.
dude, that thing is looking
It's
like,
going.
yeah. It's
It's
like,
actually-
well, I got another month to go or some shit. It's still super green.
Not to cut you off there, Spartan, but I know this is generally about the time that you get going. I'm going to let Dan jump out first because he messaged that he's got to go help the missus. So if you want to give any final thoughts and shout outs before you get running.
Yeah, thank you guys. I hate to interrupt the flow of the conversation. It was great to be back on here tonight. I need to get my ass back on here more often, and I appreciate it as always. Great conversation. Picked up a few things, so I appreciate it. It's always good to cut it up about the autos too. So thanks for that spot on there. Appreciate the questions too, guys. If you want to find out more, my Instagram's fullduplex_AFN. If you want to learn more about my cultivars, it's gnomeautomatics.com.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really think that we don't shine enough light on the autoflowers. A lot of the community is focusing more on that. There's even like the Autoflower podcast. Shout out to them. Shout out to the whole AFN, Autoflower Network, in his name. The AFN stands for Autoflower Network, for those who don't know. Great community over there. There's a bunch of autoflower growers at cocoforcannabis.com as well. So big ups to the auto community out there that are growing strong. Happy to see it. And thank you so much again, Dan, for joining us. It was great to have you.
Grower love, full duplex.
Thanks, Dan.
man. Grow love, guys. Appreciate you guys a lot. I'm sure we'll all talk soon.
Thanks for
Good night,
coming
man.
in.
Awesome.
Oh,
Peace
thanks
out.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take care,
Have a
buddy.
good night. Take care.
Spartan, this is usually the time that I give you the mic to give any final thoughts and any shout outs.
I want to give a shout out to 2020 Mendocino just because they're the breeder of that strain that I was waxing on about. So that was Sparkle Face. So 2020 Adam out there, you guys are fucking doing your thing, man. I appreciate you guys. And that's a cross of the snow cane that I picked out of their or the snow cane pheno that I picked out of their snow cane cross. So it's a little special to me anyway because they're continuing to use that to breed, and that's just puts a smile on my face that I had a little part in that. But yeah, thanks guys. Shout out to all you guys first and foremost, because I could do this show with just you guys, right? It's just like coming and catching up with your buddies. And of course I don't want to leave out chat. Love you guys just as much, but there's always something about having the consistency of seeing the same people again and again. And it's like family. So appreciate you guys. Growers love, and fuck the MCMA.
Always a great way to sign out. Thank you so much, Spartan, for joining us. So many things
Peace
that I
out,
can agree with
Spartan.
there. Yeah, it's always great to have Spartan on. I totally had a great time tonight on the show. It's great to see everybody. I talked to most of these guys more than some of my family, so it is like a family in that regard. But it is we've got about 14 minutes left before our hour, and I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts that they wanted to get to before we wrap it up.
I started growing plants again.
Let's hear it. What's the first ones you popped?
I just growing 2 seeds, 2 little plants. I'm growing what the hell am I growing? A Mamma Mia, primarily because Chef OMJ, who is in the chat here, used to really love Mamma Mia. So I finally decided to grow that. And a strain I'm calling GSC. The GS is for Girl Scout, but the C is for crack. So I'm not going to refer to it too often by its full name. I really like that strain though. I dropped them on Monday. They were germinated little plants on Wednesday. And I got a germination video. I'm going to do a whole grow series, video series during this grow. And I'm working on my germination video today, and it'll drop this week.
Always great to put out new content for the people. The one thing I forgot to say, Spartan earlier was talking about how they're still using his selection, which I think is kind of a big honor. I think selection is a huge part of breeding, and the pheno that he selected out of their work must have been good enough for them to continue not only to use crossed to their selection of that strain, but in this new Sparkle Face, which it's cool. He's got some love back from them and gets to throw it out. So that's pretty awesome to see for sure. And Doc, I'm happy to see that you're growing again. I know it for me, every single time I stop growing, I kind of get like the itch, it's like, oh, I got to get back doing it again. And you had to move.
I love it. It's so fun having little plants now, though. It's like, when you take like a sobriety break, I think it's kind of like that. Because I'm really excited about my little plants. I'm going in there and checking on them all the time, and I'm talking to them. And yeah, I'm happy to be growing again. It's been a minute. The last time I had plants was for the New Year's Grow Challenge this year, which wrapped up in April. So yeah.
I'm currently smelling Amy Aces through my carbon filter, which needs to have the cover replaced because I got home the other day and I thought my wife was at home in the living room smoking. It turns out it was just the plants that I could smell as I got out of the car, like immediately, just stank of dank. It's got quite a funk. Up close, it's like really citrusy, but then from afar, it's more of like a rubber, like a new shoe rubber with like gasoline and a little bit of another funkiness that I can't really, maybe even cheese. I know that there's some cheese in the lineage, but it's it's just like loud smelling, like it permeates the carbon filter, and it's all you smell it as soon as you walk in the house, even if no one's smoking it. It's just a very strong smell. So I'm looking forward to that. That's coming down in the next few days. So
Yeah,
good job, Tao.
I'm glad to hear it, and sort of, yeah, I'm still glad. Yeah, you're all right with it. You're allowed to do that.
Yeah, dude,
That's
it's
awesome.
I found out I used to be really nervous when I first started growing in the neighborhood that I'm in. And then
Right.
like I saw a guy with Fox Farm just sitting out, and then like you see people's like lights shining out of their fucking houses and everything. So where I'm at, there's actually a lot of growers, so it's not too big of a secret, I guess. I still try to keep it low key, so I'll replace out the carbon filter cover, and that typically does it for the next run. But some stuff it just stinks right through, even if you have a brand new carbon filter. So,
Dude, I
you may
feel
have to
like
double
you're
up.
you're in the scene in Half Baked where the dad is getting high on one bedroom and the son is getting high in the other bedroom, and they don't know that they have it in common, but all they have to do is shake hands, and next thing you know, it's like you're that with your neighbors, man. You're one step away from having like a giant fucking sesh with your whole complex.
I need to. There is definitely, some people are keep to themselves more than others, and unfortunately, there's been. I won't get into it, but yeah, personal life stuff that I guess the whole pandemic makes people not open up as much, rightfully so, I guess. But I don't want to get into that on this conversation. There's enough of that in the news and everybody's day-to-day life, so we'll keep that out of tonight's conversation. We've got about 10 minutes left. Speaking of Tao and his Amy Aces, how are your other projects coming along? I know we've talked about breeding tonight. You've got a little bit of the blueberry crosses in the works from AK Bean Brains, if I remember correctly. How's that going? Is there any updates, anything new?
Not too much new. I didn't make anything new. I haven't started any of those yet. I had to like stop some areas because of the heat, and I also have all the chocolate. I started the OG chocolate Thai F5s is what it was labeled from AK Bean Brains, and the chocolate seeds that were feminized. I got 3 of those. I think 3, maybe only 2 ended up really surviving, but I have those going, so I haven't started many of the blueberry crosses I made, but I did send out a lot of testers, and a couple of them came back with really, really frosty. There's one I reposted on my IG, but and then someone else, he tried he ran out the Amy's, the blueberry, and the Bruce Banner by Cheesequake, Bruce Banner #3 by Cheesequake that I did. And he's like, oh, that Bruce Banner is so special. That's the one. That's the best one. That's the best one. But everybody else like loves the Amy. But I want to try a whole bunch of that. So yeah, I have so many I want to start that I don't have the room for. But I'm going to run everything chocolate first, and then start going through other stuff.
I know you've been talking about the chocolate hunt for a while. So once you got your hands on that stuff, I'm sure you definitely made the room available that you did have. So I hope you find it. I think like if you seek, you shall find, typically with cannabis, and it might not be on the first hunt, but you put it out there, people will keep on sending you chocolate or chocolate related genetics. And eventually I think if you cross it into something or even just grow enough of the seeds, you'll come across it. Hopefully. I've definitely come across it. And one of the strains that Dan talked about earlier was the pinkleberry. So he must be, I don't know how plugged in with Ross Kaya Paul over there, who bred that. And maybe I know he has the coffee as well, which is known to have some dark chocolate and rich notes like that. So that might be something to look into as well.
Yeah, people definitely say they have tasted it, so I know it's there. It's just got to be, yeah. So this is like the first place I'm going to look, to chocolate because of its reputation, kind of, and because AK Bean Brains, everything I ever tried from him was spot on. That's why I supported him and got his what he labeled. Yeah, so it's probably really good, actually. I can't wait. So yeah,
everything I've heard of from him has been good so far. Queen just picked up a F4 Cali Mist, which came out of nowhere. I didn't see him working with it or really talking about it, but maybe I'm not following him closely enough. But he dropped it. I think it was a limited drop, and then she crossed that into one of her other things that she's working on. So shout out to Queen. She's still doing her thing, making some cool original crosses. I got some of her seeds that I won, and guess how many seeds there are, and I was just counting my seeds like by 10, a Velvet Punch for my testers at the time, and I guess like within like 5 of the actual number. So she sent me some of her, I think it's like Queen White Haze F2 and F3 or something, but I need to definitely pop those at some point. I've got so much stuff like Tao to grow and only so much space, so it can definitely get difficult there. But with that said, with 6 people left and 7 minutes left on the show, I think we can go around the panel and everybody give their final thoughts and shout out. And I'll start, not like I normally would this week because there's not the normal crew right now, but I'll start with Kyle Breeder first.
Hey, thanks, Jack. Yeah, I learned a lot tonight, man. Some stuff I didn't really know. I'm glad Dan was here. I have missed him. He's a really good dude. And yeah, I hope everyone's doing all right. And I'll see you guys next week. If anyone's looking for feminized seeds, I do have a website. It's the letter P followed by the word breeding.com. I do have a brand new limited release coming out in a couple weeks. I'll definitely post on what date exactly. And I'm also going to the Harvest Cup in Worcester, and I'll have some seeds there. So if anybody's listening that lives in New England or wherever, and you guys want to come chop it up with me for a bit, I'll be there at the Harvest Cup. And yeah, all social media platforms is pure breeding. Instagram's pure_breeding. And yeah, see you guys next week and take care.
Good stuff. And do you have, if I remember from the DMs, do you have some of Gnome Automatics seeds available either through your website or will they be with you at the thing in Worcester, Mass?
That's a good. What's that? That's a good question. I should. I don't want to say for sure, but yeah, I'll see. I'll look into that. I probably will. But yeah, I'll talk to Dan. I gotta talk to Dan about all that stuff.
No worries. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it was definitely cool to have him and you on the show tonight as well. Always great. And pass it next to Dr. MJ.
Hey, this was fun. I enjoyed talking to Full Duplex, as everybody did. And yeah, I'm excited to get back to growing out my little plants. So everybody come check out my germination video later this week. Subscribe to my channel. Come check us out at cocoforcannabis.com. We're doing giveaways and grow challenges and all sorts of fun stuff. And I will be back here next week, to have more fun with you guys.
Thank you so much for joining us. And next up, Aaron the Grower.
Thanks, Jack. Panel. It's always fun. I had a lot of fun tonight. I think Dan is sort of underrated. He's an absolute plethora of knowledge. So tonight, this was really cool. A lot of learning. I'm Aaron the Grower, atgacres.com, atgacres on Instagram. I want to give a quick shout out to C-Dub. Again, I always shout him out. He's such a good guy. He connected with Kazoo, got some of my rosin to him. And that just warms my heart because I feel like that batch of Granimals rosin has just floated around the entire country. It's so beautiful and so illegal. Anyway, so always love being here. Look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, panel.
Make sure to check out atgacres.com for some merch and plant factors, the best way to send a clone. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you. That Granimals rosin is super fire. Anybody who got to try some, very lucky. I can't wait to meet C-Dub. He's going to be C-Dub from SoCal soon because he's moving right down near Jack Greenstock. So we're going to be linking up sooner than later. So C-Dub,
yes, sir.
It was awesome seeing you in the chat, and I can't wait to meet you in person. Great people in this community, and it's just awesome to actually link up with them. So somebody who links up with other members of the community is the American one. I know one of the people I DM with regularly mentioned that they might have met up with you again recently. So cheers to that, and final thoughts and shout out from you.
Shout out to you, Jack, for hosting and everyone on the panel. Definitely shout out to Chad. I was in and out of chat. Sorry, I wasn't there the whole time. And yeah, definitely shout out to Full Duplex for coming by. He's so I'm so glad he stopped in, and I hope he comes on every week. So that was great.
He is a great dude.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I mean, a decade of experience with Autoflower breeding. Just thinking back, like you could see, he like reflected. He's like, "Oh, we started Autoflower accurate in 2011. That was literally a decade ago, like 10 years exactly." And I kind of think of things in like a decade, how far they've come. But it's cool to see that that's exactly when they had started, and that's a lot of experience. I've only been doing it for 2 years, and you can learn a lot every year. So it's cool to get to hear some of the stuff that he shared with us tonight. Feel very privileged and honored to have him. And last and certainly not least, I believe, is Matthew Gates.
I definitely enjoyed the discourse today. I like that we got to talk about a bunch of different topics like we often are able to. Not a whole lot of IPM as much, but honestly, I learned a lot of cool stuff, especially about my friend Gnome Automatics. And I'm really excited to have that name become a lot more popular. And I'm just excited to see both him and also pure breeding. We have a couple of name changes lately, so I have to keep up with that. And I want everyone else to be aware of that too, because they really deserve the credit. And if you want to find plant health information from me, you can find it in 3 places mostly. My YouTube channel, Zenthanol, my professional website for consultation, zenthanol.com, and also my Instagram at SyncAngel.
It was a pleasure to have you this week, as always. I know we didn't get to as much IPM, but I think that it's cool to share some of the science that you shared on your page and be able to talk through some of that things. And I think you have a lot of great input, whether it's IPM related or not. So always a pleasure to have you. And I think I am the last one, and everybody else has given their final thoughts and shout out. So you can find me at Jack Greenstock, like you see right here behind me, if I lean far enough to the left, on Instagram, as well as Cannabis, which I use very, very rarely. My notifications don't necessarily work like I'd want them to, but check it every now and then. You can also email me, jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. And last one would be Jack_Greenstock on Twitter, if I didn't already say that. And if you want a copy of the book, 50 Strains of Green, go to 50strains.com. It's available internationally and in the US. So thank you to everybody who's already gotten one. Thank you to everybody who shows up each week. Spartan mentioned that we could do this with just each other. One week that actually happened, like something happened with Zoom. I couldn't get it up to YouTube, and it's like the lost episode. I didn't have the forethought to hit record, but we all just hung out for 2 hours and ended up talking grow anyway. And I don't know, it's a great time always with this crew, and to see the regulars in the chat every week and to see it growing, new people every week as well. It's just an awesome thing to be a part of. So thank you all so much for allowing me to do this and host a show and learn and grow with all of you each week. It's humbling and awesome. So with that said, Jack Greenstock signing out.